be talking about visual communication for storytelling. This one's such a hot topic, so I'm really excited to introduce Mark Allen. Mark Allen is the founder of Visual Translation, a consulting partnership that provides business advantages to clients through innovative communication solutions. Mark is responsible for developing, managing, and deploying creative teams to achieve business objectives through compelling communications. He supports business success by helping clients clarify processes that are critical to their initiatives. Mark's 20-plus years. How is that possible? You're only 29, right? Of experience with major consulting. Where is it? Standby. AV and paper issues. And their Fortune 500 clients allow him to share insights on how to truly connect with audience to improve sales, training, knowledge sharing, and change management. Why don't you take it away, Mark?
Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? Great. New and improved wiring system here of the microphone down behind the tie. As we warm up to the topic today, I'd like to ask all of you to answer a question for me, if you would. A very important question. Are the front or the rear flippers on a penguin longer? Do you know? The front? They have front flippers. The actual answer to the question is less important than how you maybe arrived at your answer. My guess is that most of you had to call a picture of a penguin into your memory, your mind's eye, and examine it for a moment to try and answer that question. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. I want to talk about the science behind visual thinking and visual communications. All of us are bombarded every day by thousands of images from all manner of sources. And we have what's called an adaptive unconscious that helps us sort, prioritize these images into what's critically important to our survival at that moment, or maybe can be stored for future reference. It's what in the animal kingdom you might call instinct, but in people it works more like intuition. We just very quickly make these snap decisions and judgments. And what I want to talk to you about today is how you can tap into the psychology to make your business communications much more effective. A little bit more about the agenda. We're going to talk about the visual thinking science, as I mentioned. I'm going to show you a few business applications, examples that you've probably seen before in your travels. I'm going to make you work for about 10 to 15 minutes, but I promise it'll be fun. It won't be anything too laborious. And then we're going to shift gears, and we're going to look at how you can make your communications much more effective moving forward, and some resources that you can explore if the topic interests you. So who am I? Just a little more information about why I'm here. I'm sure that both Microsoft and Starbucks are honored to be sharing a stage with me today. I'm the founder of a small consultancy. I've been doing this kind of work for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I worked in Mercer's Executive Learning Center on adult education and instructional design. And then before that, I was at Anderson and Accenture in Chicago working with their clients as a communication director. So quite a bit of internal communications around their subjects, as well as client-focusing work for Sarah Lee and other clients of Accenture and Anderson. There's always been a focus on communications and how to improve communications, and the visual psychology, I think, is one of the more interesting areas to explore. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I appreciate you inviting me here to your seminar to talk on the subject. There are many different research projects that have already been conducted to explain how visual communications help us improve our storytelling. This one came from 3M and the Wordy School, where they determined that decisions and meetings and movement to desired action are all greatly improved when you marry a visual to a word. Similarly, 89% better retention. I've also seen figures that show that there's a 6-fold increase after you receive an image and a word, so that you're able to recall it that much farther out down the future than you could if you just saw the word alone. Why is that? It's because of something called the picture superiority effect. And there's a scientist, Alan Pavio, who in 1971 hypothesized that when an image is paired with a word and you're shown both, something called dual coding happens. The word and the image both go to different parts of your memory and compound the possibility that you'll remember it and be able to recall it in the future if you need to answer a question. I'm guessing that you saw this guy a few minutes before when I asked you about his flipper light, so there's your answer. We make sense of our world visually. If you instinctively think you're a visual animal, it's because you are. 17,400 years ago, some of our early ancestors sketched 20,000 images in caves like this one in Lascaux. We're still interpreting what they probably meant. Many of these images are for hunting processes. Some of them are for star charts, is the current thinking. And there were probably religious rituals as well. But one of the points that I want to make today is that without the cultural context, it can be very difficult to accurately interpret a visual. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Voyager, which in 40,000 years, it may pass by another planetary system. If you're something of a cynic like myself, you might see this as a bookend to the other image, in that it could be our last communication as a civilization. But Edward Tufte, he's a luminary at Yale who's written the book Quantitative Information and How to Visualize It. He's the one that said vision's the only truly universal language. If you're translating things for other markets, other audiences, for demographic groups that may be older or younger, visuals are extremely effective because they cut through any kind of interpretive nuances that our language sometimes leaves. Perhaps even it would help extraterrestrials understand what we're talking about. I'd love to be able to interview them at some point and see if this makes sense. Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book called Blink that should be on all of our reading lists. If you haven't already read it, go get it and skim it. He put forth this idea of thin slicing, which in short is the idea that we make very snap decisions about things, sometimes without even knowing it. We make snap decisions about people, subjects, communications, products, all the time. This is one famous example where in 1994, two engineering designers at Herman Miller came up with a new theme design for a chair called the Aeron. And at the time, you might remember the chairs were big puffy things with leather and cushions and heavy frames. That was the executive chair that was expected. This was generally disregarded as uncomfortable looking and even painful looking, like it might be sadistic to sit in something like this with no cushions at all. Over time it was accepted and it's become very popular. It's in the Museum of Modern Art, but it's a fine example of how thin slicing example we can make mistakes. We can misinterpret things that are new to us just and dismiss them quickly. In reference to our current audience, I also wanted to share some of these Chinese knockoffs where they rely on thin slicing to try and promote their own products. Many of you are probably familiar with the triple arches of McNoll's. Buckstar coffee, very delicious. And my favorite, pizza. It's like you're thinking deep thoughts about pizza, like, do I want to eat that or not? So again, thin slicing can be used in a variety of different ways for malicious purposes. What I'm hoping is that the different psychological concepts that I share with you today will only be used for good and not for evil. John Ridley Stroop in 1935 hypothesized there was a part of the brain, and I'll make use of the pointer here, this anterior cingulate, right there, that is responsible for reconciling things that we visually see and that we're mentally trying to read or interpret. He conducted an experiment on college students to demonstrate how it works. It's very important in our work, as I'll point out, but I'll take you through the exercise. It's kind of fun, and I think we can do it as a group. What you need to do is read the color of the word and not what the word itself says. And I'll give you a minute to see how quickly you can skim through some of these. When the word and the color are the same, it's relatively easy, isn't it? Now, just to mess with your anterior cingulate, if I do that and tell you to read the color, not the word, how much does it slow you down? Stroop measured the effect that it had on your brain and your speed. And by reversing these, it makes it a little bit easier. Maybe not as easy as the first instance, but if you're to read just the colors and not the word, this should become easier for you again. He called this the Stroop effect. There's a good footnote for you. If you come up with an effect, you can name it after yourself. Though I don't think I'd want to name brain freeze after myself. This is the same principle that causes us to have attention fatigue when we're proofreading something, or we've looked at an image perhaps over and over, and then we stop to see it. We stop to realize there's a mistake in there until someone else walks up and says, what's going on right here? This is misspelled. And it makes you just want to pound your head on a wall. Now you have a name for that, Stroop effect. And it certainly happens outside in the world as well. I love to collect these kinds of images where you have a meeting that's in total opposition to the image that you're seeing. So let's shift gears and talk about how this all plays into our work as communicators. There are several main categories of business visuals that you've probably seen in your work. They range from a process diagram that starts at a definite point and ends at another point. There's life cycle models, like the ones you maybe remember from grade school, that have tadpoles evolving into frogs and then laying more eggs in a pond. There are network diagrams, which are broader infrastructure overlays. And before and after diagrams, which are very helpful if you're trying to resolve some kind of change. Many organizations have change. I'm going to walk you through some actual business examples of each of these. This is a process map for the Intercontinental Hotel Group, and it outlines the approach to opening a new hotel. It could be a Holiday Inn Express as it is here, or a stay bridge. What they wanted to establish were the 8 main phases, the touch points and the milestones that occur at each. So as they internationally approach their hotel business, they could communicate the same process with the same terms to both their internal stakeholders and franchisees that might be opening one of these properties. Here's an example of a life cycle model. This is for David Nadler's congruence model to organizational change. Many consultants have seen or worked with in some fashion before. ITIL is the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. This kind of flows right off the tongue. It's a British standard for managing service desk and IT. It's incredibly hard to follow. There are a lot of different German charts and phrases if you go out on Wikipedia that try and outline how this works. But this project involved clarifying it for an uninitiated audience of disinterested employees that just needed to understand how to work with the service desk. What's the process and why are we following it to get our help desks answered? Another example of an environment model, you probably see these in paper, National Geographic very often. This example is the Phoenix, which was a sister ship to the Arizona, now a memorial. Phoenix was sold to the Argentine country, and it wound up being sunk by the British during the Falkland War. But a network diagram will have typically a lot of call-outs, breakouts, insertions, and arrows pointing. As I mentioned, before and after diagrams are very good for corporate change. Hoffman Construction had implemented a number of new technologies, and at their shareholder meeting, stockholder meeting, they wanted to talk about how it would improve their businesses. So they worked through this using the central elevator core as a metaphor for some of the new technologies they were implementing to improve their business. Okay, with that, I'm going to put you guys to work. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the premise. The year is 2540. You've just been brought out of cryogenic freeze by a team of anthropologists and scientists. They're delighted to have found you. They've recently uncovered a device. Archaeologists don't know what it is. It's from your time period. They want you to explain what it is using a simple process model. Are you ready to see the device in your challenge?
Yes.
Here it is. It has 2 slots in the top. It has some kind of lever on the side. It appears that there's a dial, some kind of dial, and a couple lights at the bottom. What I want you to do over the next 10 minutes for our science in the future is to draw me a process map of how this device works and what its function is. You can use words if you want to, but I have to warn you that in the future everyone speaks Mandarin with a Canadian accent. So it's a little odd. They may not understand what you're trying to do. So work at your table with the pens and pencils, and I'll check on how you're doing. Would any brave soul like to come forward and share their diagram with our research team of anthropologists? I will use this pointer to point at someone. Come on forward. Where's the microphone? That's great. She's way in the back, so let me get the microphone for that. Yeah, just have to talk a little bit. You can hold it up and maybe I'll hold it for you if you like. Yeah. Describe how it works.
So, I basically just created sort of like the bread, where the bread goes, the function of the button, the fact that there's a timer. I mean, you can't really tell that it's built in. Then the fact that this pops up, you get hot bread, then you have butter, and the final result.
Great. Can I ask you a question? Our team of archaeologists here in the future have had a little trouble figuring out what powered this device.
Part of the mind. I guess I forgot to add the electricity portion.
Can I see a show of hands how many people included some kind of power source in their process model? Very good. Pat yourselves on the back. Thank you. Can I get another volunteer to come forward?
Power source is somewhat mysterious, but it's integrated.
Plug.
Well, the power lines.
Power
I
line.
have to figure all that out. She doesn't know.
Oh.
Speak into the microphone.
I wanted, in order to show what they do with this, ultimately, I wanted to show someone eating it because they could assume that we were making some industrial part, or they wouldn't know what the ultimate goal was. So I thought showing the person eating it would be a good idea.
Show of hands, how many people have shown consumers or someone making use of the output of this device? Very good, very good. Maybe half of you. Excellent work. Anyone else? Maybe one more volunteer? Thank you. Okay.
I've started with an oven with the bread baking inside of it, and then moved it to the table where you slice it, and then it moves into the toaster where there's the little heat coming out of it, and then into someone's mouth, and it says crunch.
Good. How many people have shown the source of the material that goes into the toaster? How many people took it back further than the loaf of bread? I think I saw one person drawing wheat growing in a field. Very good, thank you. Okay, so what did we learn from that? We learned that...
I just want to let you know that they're repairing a drain in the kitchen. And so we apologize for the ambient noise. They're working hard to finish as soon as they can, because this is also a working restaurant, so they have to get up and running for service tonight. So I just wanted to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is the loud noise over there.
You don't want to see them snaking a drain. That's probably not pretty. The exercise, though, demonstrates very quickly and easily how we all perceive a process, how there's sometimes a poorly defined start and end. That may be part of the assignment, is to figure out how far back you have to go in the process to really convey the meaning. And as you look around the table at the other illustrations that your peers have drawn, the tremendous variation in how you lay out that story. I think that you've done a great job identifying the power source, the source of the material that's coming in, and very important also, why? Why even bother? What does this thing exist for? So let's shift gears and look at some examples of other processes and how they can be improved. So here's an example of an Excel spreadsheet. I'd like to consider the audience first in communications. This was actually designed by the Oregon Department of Transportation to be given to grade school teachers for them to share with their grade school students. And it conveys information about safe routes to school, how many kids walk or bike to school. Now, as an adult, I find this not very engaging, and I can't really imagine grade school kids benefiting from this service of information. So thinking about your audience always helps. This was redesigned as a Word template that imports that Excel spreadsheet and produces 50 different reports for 50 different Portland schools, charting the information in a more visual way, so you can see how your school, Abernathy, compares to others in your peer group. And something else that's important is once you're more than 2 miles away from a school, it really doesn't make sense for you to be walking or biking safely. So at some point, you're not really encouraged to do that anymore, which was missing in the earlier story.
I was just noticing that that could even be improved further. Instead of asking questions and making you have to decipher the data, could there have been a statement that says, this is what that data tells us. And
Yeah.
you can still decipher it if you want to. But
Definitely.
rather than ask a question and maybe like, well, what does blue mean?
Yeah, there's certainly more ways to improve things. I've always been impressed when I share something that I think I figured out and I'm proud of myself. Just as in this group effect, somebody will look at it and say, why is this like not over there? Again, it makes me want to bang my head on the wall. But it was a tremendous improvement both in communicative abilities and in that they no longer had to manually produce 50 of these spreadsheets to send to schools, but rather they could use that spreadsheet and it would generate 50 reports in Word, which is kind of a neat feature in Microsoft's Office suite. So how many of you have worked with PowerPoint before? Today, every day, in your sleep, maybe you see nightmares like this. What is actually going on here is an explanation of how intelligent network software is supposed to work in a utility. This is one of maybe 3,000 slides Accenture shared with me to explain this software. And it is not very effective at communicating its subject because, well, there's so many reasons. There's arrows going in different directions and a hodgepodge of photos, sketches, and icons that also confuse the eye. When you're designing something, it helps to understand where it's ultimately going to be shown. This being PowerPoint, PowerPoint should be used more as learner support rather than speaker support or some kind of dumping ground for ideas that you're getting as a committee. So this was redesigned to be much clearer in conveying what the benefits are of the smart network. So this consolidates several hundred slides to more quickly convey what it is that they're trying to sell to utility companies. And from here, they can more effectively go into the details of how it works. But viewers need to have the big picture, and they need to have some kind of mental model that they can hang ideas off of. Color is very important. Color is often used rather randomly in slide decks, as you've probably seen. It isn't the major problem with this slide. This is an engineering diagram of how low latency financial models work. And it's a New York-based company that provides that data information from European exchanges to companies like Fidelity and Wells Fargo. They were actually using this from a marketing communication standpoint at seminars to explain why their network was better than other networks. And even engineers that I spoke to had a hard time following what is the story here. So the first challenge was really to redraw this and try and highlight what are the main points and then bring color back in to highlight that story. High performance, global distribution, fully managed, this is what they do. And this is essentially the same story that they were trying to convey here in this, but it's much easier to follow now. When you reduce copy to a minimum, when you shift the burden of communications to images, then those words that you keep are all the more important. And this is an example, a rather extreme one, of a series of help documents that were produced for a Portuguese company. They were putting these rural energy units in Africa to help villagers generate solar power, filter their water for health reasons, and also generate biogas. Well, the other problem, aside from being out in a remote rural village, is that there were few people that could read out there. And almost everything had to be conveyed with visuals so they could maintain these power plants once they were on site. Guiding the audience to a logical conclusion might be another fourth or fifth big tip I could impart to you guys. On the right, we see a diagram from a Swiss company called DuBrowa. Some of you have iPads, others of you may have Kindles. If you've ever looked at an ebook before, ebooks aren't generally produced by the publishers like Macmillan and Wiley. They're produced by intermediaries that do that as a service. What this company is trying to promote is the software that a publisher would buy to use to produce their own ebooks and manage that content as they do other publishing cycles. But looking at this diagram, what you might conclude is that they're the distribution network for these kinds of books, or they're the distribution network for the letter W. A little hard to tell. So this has been redone so that there's 6 clear steps involved in the process of producing an ebook so a publisher can understand what it is that they're talking about. And this on their website was also translated into German and French, which is interesting because I can still tell what it is that they're trying to convey, even if I can't read the language myself. There's some other factors that go into a really good information graphic, and these include having a good, interesting subject matter, something that is engaging for people visually. We want it to be functional, to have a purpose, a really good form factor to the earlier points of, is it a process diagram, is it a before and after diagram, and it has to be truthy, as Stephen Colbert might say. There should be a high level of integrity with the information you're using. This came from David McCandless, who has an excellent blog and website called Information is Beautiful. And if you'd ever like to peruse a site for good graphics, what's being done in information design, that's one resource that I'll share with you, as a few others later on. I mentioned earlier Edward Tufte, visualizing quantitative information. He's a professor at Yale, works in this area quite a bit. He likes to cite this as one of the best early examples of an information graphic, and you can buy the poster if you want to and hang it up on your wall. People will recognize that you're an information graphics junkie. This was developed in 1869 by Charles Menard, and what it's showing is the march of Napoleon's troops to Moscow and then their subsequent retreat. And the thickness of this line shows the troop strength. You can see at a glance how I think 5 people straggled back into France at the end of this ill-fated march. Along the bottom is the temperature, so you can see how cold it got and what effect that had on the few troops that were left, and the geography. So there's several things that you can see at once in this early information graphic that really make it a tour de force. As opposed to this, again, information overload in PowerPoint, where you just feel you have to cram everything into a slide that you possibly can. And it leads to, I think, all of us just tuning it out, turning it off, not even trying. Another problem that we've all labored with is having too much knowledge, being so close to our subject that we don't even remember what it's like to not understand that subject. If you ever think that you might be suffering from that, a good answer is to show what you're working on to somebody that has no prior exposure to it. Just as a check, just to see if they understand what it is that you're trying to do or say. Quick example. And this is, you may not be able to see, but there's actually 2 similar boxes that have the same label that prompted me to ask the client, are these 2 different things? If not, why aren't they the same box? And with that simple question, it was a matter of tearing it all up and starting over, because the whole thing really made no sense, even to the people that had created it. But what we're trying to do is to ferret out, what is the main thing that you want to convey? What is it that the audience needs to know about this? What at the heart of it is the message? It's primarily peeling back the layers of an onion to get at the core story. This is the more simplified version of the same that just outlines the major projects that are being undertaken to improve the central theme of inventory reduction, delivery improvements, and of course profit growth. So let's play another game. There's an Italian design firm. They wanted to show how information graphics could be used at their simplest form to convey complicated life stories. Each of these stories that I'm going to show you is an individual that you probably know. So I want you to raise your hand or shout out the name of the individual once you've got it. And this will help, I think, demonstrate how you can simplify a complicated story very effectively if you work at it. So here's the first one. Who is this famous character?
Caesar.
Caesar. It's too easy for you guys. Kind of Cleopatra up here with her pyramid. How about this one? A little harder.
Bruce Lee.
Yeah, very good. It's Bruce Lee, okay. On to the lightning round.
Hitler.
Yeah, there's kind of giveaway down here. That makes it really easy, I think, for most people. To challenge you guys a little bit more. How about that? I particularly like the representation of the lost years in the center when he apparently was an airline steward. Aisles clear, please. Aisles clear. Okay, one more. Who got it? Michael Jackson? That's a little morbid, I know, but I like it. I think it's kind of funny. So, for those of you that may still be skeptical about the power of visuals, I wanted to demonstrate the power with one last exercise for you. And for this, I'll require an audience volunteer. You don't have to get out of your seat, so this is an easy one. Who wants to volunteer? I'll use the pointer and pick someone if you're not careful. All right, Eric, I'm going to make you volunteer because I know your name. I see you over there smiling. I'm going to read your mind. I want you to think of a number between 1 and 100.
Okay.
What's the number? You have to tell me.
13.
I have it in this envelope. I've already prepared the number, and I'm now going to reveal it. The Chinese character for 13. There you go. The power of visuals. Not convinced? I'll do it again. How about a breakfast cereal? Somebody like to give me their favorite breakfast cereal? Captain Crunch. Are you sure? Okay, we'll go with Captain Crunch. The UPC code for Captain Crunch. Is that not amazing? Are you not impressed? So my point is that, as I said before, without context and cultural understanding, it's really hard to interpret a visual well, for good or for bad. And what I would challenge each of you to do as you leave here is to think about how your visual ballet is working to interpret the environment around you. Be a little bit more actively aware of how it might be reading the cues around you correctly or maybe incorrectly. Some other resources that you can check out. On the web, there are some really good resources, and these are available in the PowerPoint that will be made available on the IABC site. The Invisible Gorilla research I didn't share today because it's a video, and I wisely chose not to bring any video. But it demonstrates attention fatigue in a video and also how you can be distracted easily from something that's going on that could harm you potentially. The Good magazine has some wonderful transparency archives. They run information graphics in all topics of business endeavor. Information is beautiful. I mentioned earlier, this is the link to David McCandless. And the RSA is a British organization that does whiteboard projects on, it's kind of like those UPS ads where he draws on the wall and it animates. So he'll talk about things like school and the problem with schools, or work ethic in different parts of the world, and there'll be somebody drawing the whole time, which is really fascinating. Some really good books. I mentioned Edward Tufte's book. He has a series. Blink Very good book about thin slicing and how we perceive the world. Made to Stick is a good one, as is this lesser-known book, Why Do Business People Speak Like Idiots? And I love it because it was written by some Deloitte consultants that were just fed up with seeing the words world-class and, just all manner of things that you see when you're at your office and it comes across your desk and it makes you wonder, what does that mean anything at all? What does that mean, world-class? With that, I will take any questions that you might have. I'll try my best to answer them.
We'll get a mic going around.
Is there sort of a median age that infographics are geared towards? Do you consider generational differences?
Well, it's a good question. I think with the increasing speed with which we're bombarded with information all the time, information graphics are helpful for both senior citizens, which I almost count myself as now because it's hard to read small print and I like to see things mapped out as a visual, and also for younger folks like my teenage kids that just have a natural attention deficit disorder and they want to do something really fast. So they want to see a picture of it and move on or jump to the next website. So I would say that there is no age-appropriate focus. There is, I think, more importantly, though, a need to look at where it's going and what that contextual audience might need to understand. Because there are some things that are misconstrued in other societies, like the color black in the Orient is a very bad color to use for information graphics and general communications. I've seen, actually, at the Good Transparency site, a color wheel that shows the different ways that different societies interpret colors, like red, black, blue. Very interesting.
Hi, I love the visual where you could see the hand drawing, and I was just curious what your process is, taking it from hand drawing to the sort of 3D, sort of what that looks like these days.
Yeah, I have so many sketches that I'd love to share with you, and at some point I'll put together a presentation of nothing but that evolution from early renders to the final. And there is a tremendous amount of work that goes on in exploring this possible solution or that one. It's very iterative. There's usually 3 or 4 different ways to lay it out. And it usually goes through what I would call a napkin sketch that is just a quick thumbnail like that, a blueprint where you start to lay the copy in over it to make sure that you have all the points addressed, and then the final render, which is a production step for wherever it's going. There are some samples on my website that I've posted for the evolution of different projects that I didn't bring with to share today. No other tough questions?
Yeah, all right.
I might not need the microphone, but I've seen the big popularity of infographics, especially on Wired or New York Times. I've seen a lot of services that are offering out of the box. You put in your data and it produces a graphic on the inside. I've seen many of those in action, and
I'm sorry, out of the box?
I've seen many of the out-of-the-box services in action.
I don't think so. I'm not sure I know what that is.
Well, if you provide the data, they'll provide a render of that data. So sort of like what you did with the Microsoft thing, except probably a little bit more.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's statistically based, and I like it because it is a way of generating charts from data. But if what you're working with doesn't have any data and it's more of a process change, or it's more of a theoretical esoteric idea like SAP software, how it's going to impact a process in a company or a supply chain, then that doesn't really help.
What are your suggestions for getting a client to go with a more visual PowerPoint slide that has every single word, every single step on it? Because everyone must know everything about our process.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question, and it's one that I see very often, as I'm sure many people here in the room do. If there isn't an appreciation for visual thinking and how it can be easier on an audience, then it's very hard to make that point. When I was working at Mercer, we'd subject senior executives to the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type analysis. And while most people are visual thinkers, there is a subset of engineers and bankers and people that work in environments like Novartis chemical labs that do prefer statistical charts to visuals. It's a really small percentage of people, but there are different learning styles and types, and you may have somebody that just doesn't register visuals the way the rest of us do. But the best suggestion I could offer is to show them a before and after and see if they don't respond to that. If they don't notice it right away, that this is easier to talk to and easier to absorb for an audience, then it's really hard.
Any other questions? Ray?
So you mentioned the number, I think it was 89% retention of words and paired with pictures. Where else what's a good resource to get more information like that?
You mean the really good stats that will back up your argument?
Exactly.
I collect those. I love those. I post them whenever I can on my blog, whenever I find a new research paper or something. And you guys may double and triple the readership of my blog just by going out there today. It's not something that I promote actively. It's more of a tool I use just to post client work and then direct people to it when they want to see a sample. But I also do, for my own benefit, collect any scientific research I can find that points to why visuals work better than words alone. You can also write to me after this if you want, and I'll always be sure and add anything new I find to an email going out to you. I put some business cards on the front desk, so on your way out you can pick them up if you miss me during the mixer, but I do really love to receive that kind of information when I can and share it.
Any other questions?
So just as for PowerPoints, do you have any like rules of thumb, practical advice on how to make PowerPoints less wordy? And like I've heard, one image or one word per slide. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Less is more. I think if you look at the way Steve Jobs used PowerPoint, it's the extreme of simplicity, but it causes a lot of discomfort for the presenter because then you don't have the words there to read to an audience. And there's nothing worse that you could do to adult learners than stand up and read to them. Adult learners are cynics. They want to know what the benefit is for them. They want to know right away. They're a lot harder to teach than children in many ways. You talk to instructional designers. So I think the revelation of Steve Jobs and the way he would approach presentations is he teases things. He uses words and images, then he pays it off with his own presentation. And that, I think, is a really good approach. I wouldn't say there's any hard and fast rule about only 2 photos or only 2 images or only 3 words. But certainly some of the examples I showed you were intended to show extreme examples of dysfunction. Apologies to any clients that see this video online.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Okay, we had built in a little bit of extra time in our agenda, which we now need, which is fabulous. So we're just going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to start up again around 10 after 3, and I won't make you do a